All right, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm here with Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, what are you holding right now?
It's actually a phone stand. It's a big crystal phone stand for you know.
And who among us gets a big crystal phone stand and who is like lobbing it up in the air during the middle of the intro song that we're working on? That looks amazing, buddy.
I saw it somewhere and I thought it's good because you can kind of lean it against there, whatever. But remember, we have a big, thick wooden football at Sumer headquarters in Sumer South. So I don't know, maybe it's just kind of the heaviness of.
There's a big heavy football in Palm Beach for us when we get there.
No, we don't have it there yet. I want to.
Okay, so just Sumer North, which Atlanta is north only for random people. It is south for me. I'm going to say, like, I'm excited because Thomas, I get to go to the gym after this, and it's like 95 degrees, and but that the 95 degrees part I'm not excited about. But it is the dirty South right now in August, and we are dealing with pretty big temperatures right now. Even though we are technically in Sumer North because we have an office in Palm Beach, and we have a really fun football at the office that's like somebody engraved for you. It's like 50 pounds, and it's fun to play with, but probably dangerous.
Well, you combine the heavy football that you want to throw around in there like 2 yards. Eric Eager always lines up off the edge and always tries to get the first step, doing some like defensive end. It's like your fantasy to be a rush end in the NFL.
Well, you know me very well now. You know that like we all have playing days. You played college football. I played college football. We all have like regrets of our playing days. Like, for example, I was tackled at the 1 yard line on my last high school catch. I was tackled at the 1 yard line on my last college catch. I think about those, not every day. Of course, I'm not a psycho, but like I think about those periodically. I do regret at 6'3" and like probably, top playing weight 240. I do regret not playing like edge defender. I think I would have been a better edge defender than wide receiver, tight end. Just like mentally, I think I would have been able to handle that position better than, when the ball's in the air and there's the thought process that goes through your head when you're somebody who is not necessarily mentally the best. Like I was. Like I wish I would have played defensive end or outside linebacker in college for sure.
Well, I have to say, as my eyes take me, I think you're more of a gradual mover, even though you cover ground. I didn't see a whole bunch of pop and explode, coming off the edge of the table the other day. I thought maybe it was a little more gradual, but hey, there's been some really good ones that can do that. We passed on guys out there over the years that didn't have what Dan Quinn was looking for, and explosiveness off the edge. And I mean, there's been some good ones. We know that.
So what you're saying, and this tracks because I had a much better 200-meter dash time in high school than a 100-meter dash time. It does take me a little bit to get going, and the twitchy stuff. Although I did have a pretty high vertical, but yeah, I mean, I wasn't going to make the NFL no matter what position I played. But it is fun to daydream and think about, if you would have played that position over that position. The only position I know, even though I do have a strong arm, that I could not play was quarterback. Quarterback, I was always a disaster playing quarterback in like backyard games and stuff. I would have thrown too many interceptions for the modern game of football. But that is neither here nor there. I do want to announce some things. Firstly, this is episode 91 of the Sumer Sports Show. We thank you all for being here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, tell your friends. But also tell your friends about this, Thomas, because we are debuting today a brand new version of the Sumer Sports website. I do want to put it up on the screen here. Now, this is going to be the website that's going to host a few things. Let me know, Thomas, if you can't see this, because then the user can't see it either. But basically, we have articles up here. So we have an NFC East divisional preview. We have Sean Syed's many variations of Cover One. We have some Shanahan stuff. We have our podcast, which is great. That's going to update pretty frequently. We do have a few pages for now. These are going to go up more quickly in the future. We're going to have more league pages, more player pages, more team pages. But for our league page here, we have the results of our simulation. So we've been kind of publishing articles with what we think the outcomes are going to be for different teams, but now we have them all in one spot. This is going to be updated weekly. We also have, for now, quarterbacks. We're going to have other positions right before the season starts. We wanted to launch this a little bit for you now. Thomas, your favorite part of this is, of course, is the average depth of target. You were telling me the other day.
Love it.
Or the passing EPA, but you really like the look of this as Pittsburgh Steelers colors.
And let me just tell you, I have gotten a number of people reaching out to me, thumbs up on it. There's an energy about it, and we can still link back as you're doing if you want to go back and people want to see the original site with sort of the why Sumer, who we are, what we do, etc. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is a picture of some of the stuff that we do. And yeah, that's absolutely part of our B2B website. The one thing that I want to sort of alert people to is we will, God willing, have our fantasy bots. So what we're trying to do on our website is give people who are asking questions, on Twitter. So, people are logged on. Hey, Eric, who do I start today? Olamide Zacchaeus or Brian Hill, two guys that Thomas drafted. And I'm gonna be like, throw my hands up and send over the people to the Sumer Sports website. So we are currently building something that will be ready, I think, for the start of the season. So we're really excited about that as well. And one of the reasons we wanted to give everybody a little bit of a look-see into the product was there's just gonna be so much more available once folks commit to us at Sumer, and we're really excited about that. And obviously really appreciate your leadership and Jack Jones as well, and Paul, the founders. I'm excited for this season because we'll be able to bring a depth of analysis that I think is unparalleled.
Look, you, Eric Eager, and Steve Santiago have done a hell of a job on our consumer facing and what we're doing with this site, along with Brunello. I think I can say Brunello. And look, I think it's your chance to even give a little bit of props to our chatbot dude, Savanch, right? I mean, you guys have been working with him. I'm excited about what you guys are doing. I mean, there's a lot of excitement. I know we're rambling here probably longer than we should, and everyone's waiting for good news, football news, but it's an exciting day.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you can even go back to Parker Fleming and Tage Seth, who have done a really good job, helping host this show while we've had, a summer where we don't want to host every single show that exists. They've done great, and they will also have content that will be on this podcast platform tailored to themselves. So there are going to be a couple names. I want them to deliver what the titles of their shows are going to be when they come up. But what you're going to get is 2 doses of Eric and Thomas every week, 1 dose of Sean and Syed and Tage Seth, and then 1 dose of Parker Fleming with guests. And that should be a really cool podcast group for you in the season as you're trying to keep up with what's happening in the NFL, which, Thomas, we got 1 week of football under our belt. I know the NFL does this weird thing where they give you kind of like an appetizer in weeks, we call it P0 in the data, right? The preseason week 0. They give you a little bit of flavor. We're all like sort of talking mess on the platforms in the company, and now they gave you all 32 teams playing in one weekend. What I liked about this weekend, Thomas, and I kind of want to circle it with you, is not a ton of high-end players getting injured. And not that it matters which players get injured. You don't like any player getting injured, but it is nice when you have. You get through preseason week 1 and you're not dealing with Jason Sehorn tearing his ACL on a kick return, or, Trent Green going down, for the Rams, and all this kind of stuff that's altering the course. In the case of the Rams, positively, randomly, but like in other cases, not so much. When you were running the show in Atlanta, how much of the decision of what to do in preseason was yours, and how much of it was the head coach? And how did you guys collaborate on that? Because it is, to me, it doesn't seem like a question with an easy answer.
Most of that is the head coach. I mean, I think the head coach and the general manager have great discussions, especially on the really sort of complicated decisions, right? Whether you're going to play a quarterback or play a player who has some history of an injury, or whether you're playing a defense or a defensive coordinator's defense that you really don't trust him, in the very end, that he's going to come and be proper about how he's going to approach things. All those things factor in, and you have those conversations as a head coach and a GM. I always let Mike Smith and Dan Quinn completely make the call again, unless it had to do with something contractual or unless it had to do with ultimately a quarterback decision. But I won't mention which one of the two because they're both awesome guys. But I had a disagreement with one of our head coaches one time. It was just one of those funky times, and we came in and I was all geeked out, like I wanted to play this guy, and this guy. And the head coach said, "Look, you pay me to make this decision." I'm like, "It is the preseason. I want this running back playing because I need to see him." And we got into this banter, and then there was a couple deep breaths, and then after it was a good hug, fist bump. We're like, "Sorry, man." It was just one of those things. People get excited in the preseason. Head coaches want to put their guys in. And honestly, GMs want to see their guys that they were a part of drafting to see if they are developing properly. And that's a big thing for us.
Yeah, for sure. Because there's so many things that happen. And it's why when you look at like Twitter, for example, the preseason is also the most unhinged because we're all like, we all have our favorite college teams. We all have, if you're involved in the draft process, you all have draft crushes, right? Like Tank Dell, who we're going to talk about Houston a little bit later, but like Tank Dell, like everybody loved him coming out of college. He makes a couple plays in the preseason and everybody's like, "See, I told you so," and all this stuff. And the fact of the matter is, like, as you've said a number of times on the show, Thomas, like the 53 more or less is agreed upon in like April, May, June. And you're just trying to get out of this thing without any surprises, namely injuries. And yet for us, like, we love watching players that we thought were good, and everybody likes to find that diamond in the rough. And I imagine for you back when you were scouting, it was a big deal to watch these preseason games and see some of your guys get a lot of playing time, because even if you're right about them, not a lot of them are going to get 60 snaps in a regular season game.
Yes, and remember, everyone needs to know this when you're talking about a quarterback, right? And you really want to get a gauge of a quarterback. It's complicated when you're putting your second and third string quarterback in, trying to decide whether they're going to make your team or not, or at what, who's going to be where. And those guys are going into the game with the 3s and the 4s. They're not playing with the stud offensive linemen or the big time receivers. It is tough sometimes to get a true gauge when you're not playing your guys with the talent they'd be playing with if they were to be starting. And that always was something that was tough for me to fathom, only because I wanted that number 2 quarterback to be in there with the number 1s, because then I'd get more of a gauge, right? Or the same thing when you look at a receiver or you're looking at a corner, put them against the good players every once in a while. Be strategic about that. And may I mention this, because I'm a huge fan of what Coach Harbaugh does and Eric DeCosta does in Baltimore, and that is win preseason games. I think it's a really good tone setter. Most people disagree with me, but believe me, I've been in seasons and I've been on teams where we've gone 2, 3, and 4 years. You pulled the stats on me with Dan Quinn and me, and they were not good. And we lost momentum, as odd as that sounds, because we were too interested in not getting injured, which is very important, and playing our young guys. So it's a really interesting concept arguing about it.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of want to go off script a little bit here because it brought something up that I thought was interesting. So I don't know if you saw last week, but there was a press conference where Ron Rivera and Eric kind of outed Eric Bieniemy for coaching his players hard. And part of me, I'm going to circle back to this, because I always felt like your teams in Atlanta, 2019, you finished 6-2. You started 1-7, and that was, but you finished 6-2, right? You were a good football, like that was going into your last year. And 2018, I think you started 1-4. Similarly, you came back and had some good, like, eventually your Falcons teams showed the talent that we all thought they had, right? And the slow start was a problem. Like, it buried you guys a few years. I think of Washington, right? And, Ron Rivera is a great coach. He was a very good player of the Bears, and he was a very good coach. And he's had success. So far be it for me to judge how he coaches his players and stuff. However, when you look at Kansas City, for example, where Bieniemy was prior, now they have a great quarterback. That's the biggest variable. But this is a team that started out like 4-0 every single year except for like 2019 or 2021. I'm sorry. This team, the Chiefs, get off to a great start every single year. They practice harder than every other team too, as far as like they're in pads before everybody. There's a little bit of an edge to it. And Bieniemy goes and brings some of those principles to Washington. And a lot of players go to Ron Rivera and they're like, hey, like this doesn't, I don't like this. And I'm thinking to myself, well, yes, Washington, you started 1-7 one year, got to the playoffs randomly. You started, I think, 2-6 the next year, and last year they were 1-4. Don't you think the Washington Commanders franchise would have liked to have gone 2-2 or 3-2 and all that, and they're in the postseason? Like, don't you think? Like, I feel like there's an element of that toughness that the preseason gives rise to, and also just like coaching players hard and taking August and July seriously that leads into the season.
Have you been listening to some of the banter about whether it was right or wrong for Ron Rivera to make comments about his right-hand guy? Is he worried about the longevity of his career with a new owner? Look, let's say this first of all, because you know it. I like Eric Bieniemy. You like him he's a good football coach. He's a ball buster. I think I can say that. I mean, he gets after people, and he's coming into an organization, like you said, that needs some legitimate rejuvenation, lack of a better word, right? So it felt a little bit odd that would be talked about. That said, I'm sure there are people that are having a hard time with it. I mean, there are people in the pro ranks, of course, that don't want to deal with that sort of pressing, right? And it's up to the head coach, the owner, the GM, Martin Mayhew. How did Martin Mayhew respond, by the way? Did he have any responses about it?
I think Rivera knew that what he did was wrong, and I think he quickly apologized for it. And I think that they hope that we never hear from it again, right? Like because I mean that's a family. You're not supposed to air those things to the media. Like I was surprised it got out. I was not surprised after having being close to Kansas City for a long time. I do a podcast there every week, and like I am I think I know more about the Chiefs than most people. I think that the Bieniemy noticed, and you'll watch this soon. We'll talk about the Manziel documentary in a second. But like, if you watch the quarterback documentary, Bieniemy doesn't show up at all. Andy Reid shows up a lot. Matt Nagy shows up a lot. But they don't show Eric Bieniemy and Mahomes interacting. And I think it's because even though Mahomes respects Bieniemy, I think that they fight. Like it's a grind. And I remember this specifically, and you'll laugh, but growing up in Minnesota, in the 2009 season when the Vikings they had Brett Favre and they went to the NFC Championship game, Eric Bieniemy grabbed Adrian Peterson and told him, "You're going to be the reason we don't win the Super Bowl because you fumble too much." And like that got out in the media, and everybody's like, "Well, what a prick!" It's like, well, no, like Eric Bieniemy knows how to coach the superstars, the Petersons and the Mahomes. I think part of my issue is maybe he doesn't know how to coach as well the guys who are not as talented. But that doesn't let people like you and me guess that. Don't put it out in the media because I don't think that's functional.
Yeah, and I think, again, Eric's deserving of a chance, and he will get one. He's going there to show that he can make a legit difference without Andy, right? I mean, respectfully. And he's going to put his strongest and most energetic and most competitive foot forward because that's what he is, right? He'll fight anyone. That's just him. And I don't mean that literally. That's days of old. I'm not talking about that. But he's not backing down. And you're right. He does know how to press the athletes and the stars hard. He's not just kowtowing to them. He reminds me in a certain way, different people. Terry Robisky, I think one of the very best receiver coaches in the country, hand down. He's a hard-ass, hard-nosed guy. Used to get into Julio, used to get into Roddy White, but they loved him because they knew that he was doing what was best for him, the players, and the team, right? And I think in the end, Eric wants the best team possible. So look, yeah. I do think it's complicated. As a GM, I would probably pull Ron aside, or if it were to be Mike or Dan, I would just say, look, like let's discuss this. Let's discuss how we should clean this up so there's not all of this ridiculous banter about there being all kinds of strife within the organization. But I think he mentioned, right, he would have done, if he could do it again, he probably wouldn't mention it that way.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and look, to err is to be human. And I think there's a lot of people that think, we can get into the analysis of this, but the Washington Commanders were just sold, and this is kind of a transition period. If you look again, sumersports.com, if you look, they're projected to win 7.4 games. Which is a transition period, right? And so I think a lot of people think maybe Bieniemy's the heir apparent. Whether or not that's true, like perception matters, and maybe there's a little bit of stuff bubbling there, but you don't ever want to get that out, which is tough.
Can I mention one last thing on that? Look, yeah, it's not easy when you're going into a year that is a hot seat year, right? And I mean, God only knows. I mean, our coaches were on hot seats a lot in Atlanta. It's just kind of the way it was. I mean, God, it felt like every year we were hot, and next year even hotter. So when you go in there, no one wants to talk about it, but there's an element of insecurity, if you want to call it that way. Yeah. Like, I mean, look, Mike McCartney has to deal with what he has to deal with Dan Quinn. It was a year or two ago. Everyone was raving about Dan, right? It gets a little old, but maybe put insecurity aside. It's just human nature. There's a competitive side. There's an ego side where it's like, this is my football team. Brought a guy in who's very, really good, Bieniemy or Mike McCartney brought in Dan Quinn. But it gets, you're still a captain of it all, right? And you still want to have that presence, and you have a strong ego. You're not a head coach in this league without a strong ego. And so that's kind of tough when everyone starts wanting to ask you about Eric Bieniemy. How is he going to change the team? Blah, 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 on and on. It's kind of, it probably weighs on your nerves. So
yeah, people don't want to be upstaged in those situations. It takes like a pretty strong-willed person to handle that. And that, that's tough for sure. So speaking of, well, so let's do the ad read. Okay. Circa Sports, circasports.com, millions competition, survivor competition. It's coming up soon, right? We have college football. Week 1 is in like 3 weeks. NFL is in 4 weeks or so. Like, it's coming, right? So get prepared. Circasports.com for all of your needs as far as contests and competitions and things like that. It is the best sportsbook experience in all of Vegas. You do have to sign up in Vegas, but you can play anywhere. Circasports.com. Go to Circa Sports for all of your NFL and college football competition needs. It's absolutely fun, way to have some fun this season, trying to test your predictions. That's what we always want to do. And we'll be out there. Myself, Parker Fleming, Tage Seth will be out there at the end of the month. Thomas, I watched the Johnny Manziel documentary, and I gotta say, I kind of want to dig deep here with you a little bit on this. I generated some empathy for Johnny Manziel. When he was talking, and sometimes I think these are self-serving when they're saying stuff like, oh, when I got cut by the Browns, I was relieved, right? I had this burden off my back. And I think, sometimes you got to be careful with that language, because I think millions of people would literally want to have that burden of being the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, making $8 million guaranteed and all this kind of stuff, right? So people got to be careful, right? But I think when you look at like sort of his rise, right? Texas A&M, SEC, beats Alabama, wins the Heisman, has a second year, gets under scrutiny for, under the table stuff, goes to Cleveland, who, let's be honest, was not in a great place when he got there franchise wise. And it's overwhelming. And when I watched the documentary, I looked at a guy that like very clearly liked football, and I think that at the end he didn't like football, and that contributed a great deal to who he ended up being. I mean, this has to be, when you're thinking about player eval, drafting, all that stuff, it has to be part of the Holy Grail. And I just don't know necessarily if we on the outside don't really have a clue right now about it. Like I'm talking about me, PFF, all the you guys on the inside have a little bit more of a clue, but there are still people that fall through the cracks, like Johnny Football. So how important is this? The players drive, and also if you find out too late, say you've taken a player and you realize that he doesn't have what it takes between the years as far as does he love the game and all that stuff, like what kind of bind does that put you in as a team builder?
I got so many thoughts about this. First of all, on the documentary, on Johnny, I love those stories. We all do, right? We love the precipitous incline, decline, ascension, descension. We love to see that. That's just human nature. Watching him, you feel for him, right? Because everything that he had growing up, I mean, he was everyone's, All-American and all that. I mean, I was just watching it earlier on today when I watched him take his first high school and his first time in the high school, 2 straight up the gut, back to back penalty, takes the next one to the house, and the place going nuts. Everyone loving him. Let me turn this a minute though, because this is a really important question. So we're not just talking about the glitz and glam of it. I can't, it. Do you think an owner should be the guiding force, whether you draft someone like Johnny Manziel or not? And this isn't necessarily even truly gauged towards Cleveland, but what is your view of that? You have a general manager and a head coach who are being paid to make serious decisions. Where do you think an owner steps in on a quarterback move in the NFL? Do you think he should? Do you think it's his train?
I say this with,
of course you do.
I say this with all due respect to Paul and his peers and Arthur and all. I have a difficult time believing that putting your thumb on the scale at that position as the owner is going to be positive.
So I was going to say, I really like the Haslems. I like the Haslems a lot. I don't know the real story about it, right? And did they do it twice with everyone's All-American, your favorite quarterback
Baker?
in the entire? Yeah. I mean, was who guided that for the second? Like, was that?
Yeah, I think Baker was like to not to puff my chest out a little bit, but like Baker over Darnold was because the Cleveland Browns were a power user of PFF, and his PFF data was a lot better. In hindsight, you would have preferred Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, but like that decision, I stand by that decision because like Sam Darnold, ultimately has been worse than Baker so far, and they're both haven't been great, but like that one was actually them leaning into the analytics, so to speak. I think that the Johnny Manziel. Now, the tricky part of Manziel would be, and I don't know, like, tell me how ridiculous this is, because they took Justin Gilbert at 9 that year, right? Or 8. I can't remember if it was 8 or 9. I think Barr went to the Vikings at 8, and Gilbert was whatever. So like they got Justin Gilbert first, and Cleveland, if any franchise should know the folly of taking a quarterback in the back half of the first round, it should be Cleveland, because they went Brady Quinn, they went Johnny Football, and they went Brandon Weeden, and and no one does this really anymore because the 5th-year option, people realize it's expensive now. But like all those teams that used to kind of be like, oh, we're going to trade back into the first round to get a quarterback, they've all been bad with the exception of Lamar Jackson. And if that would be my thing, would be to say, Mr. Haslam, and again, tell me if I'm an idiot, but like Mr. Haslam, if he wasn't good enough for you to pick at 8, why is he good enough for you to pick at 20, 24, or wherever he went? Because if the owner is that convicted about a quarterback, I'm taking him at 1. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. If it's truly his train set and truly like he gets this say over this, then I'm just saying, look, like, why even put any doubt into this? I'm going to take him first, right? I'm doing, and Carolina did it. The Rams did it. Trying to think of who else has traded up for the first pick. The Washington Commanders did it with RG3. They moved up to 2. All this kind of stuff. Like, eliminate doubt and just take him early. Because to me, if an owner has that much conviction over a quarterback, I either have to dismiss it or I have to lean completely into it because it's your job, right? Like, and to take the guy at like 24 to me is just like, the owner kind of likes this guy, which if the owner kind of likes this guy, I feel like the GM should be able to like push them off that spot.
So I think a general manager and a head coach need to sit down, all honesty, and have great conversations with their ownership group, the husband and the wife in this situation, if we're talking about Cleveland, or whatever it is. I mean, myself with Arthur and Dan Quinn talking about really important moves for the organization. You have to listen to your owner. Most of the times, the owners have a ton of experience in business moves and transactions that have been really successful. But your job as a head coach and a general manager is to opine, of course, and show exactly why yes and why no. And in the end, if your owner says, well, that's great, I appreciate how you're articulating this, thanks for educating me, and with your education, augmenting with Sumer Sports, you've convinced me not to do this, great. Or I still believe I want this guy at number one, no matter what the data is saying. And the combination of data and these really good eyes that you guys have for football players, we're going to do it anyway. You know what? You signed up for that organization as a general manager, and I would say that. If you haven't done your research and understand the ownership, how you are going to approach it, and what your ultimate obligations are, then shame on you. It's not easy, for sure, but it is their world, and ultimately it's up to them. You just hope that they listen closely to what you have to say when the decision is being made.
Yeah, for sure. I think you bring up a great point that a general manager job is a life-changing job that you have to deal with the good and the bad, right? Like if you were the owner, you'd be the owner, right? Like general manager, you're executing the desires of an owner in managing a team. And like obviously a lot of your expertise goes into it, of course. And that's, I'm sort of one of those people where it's like, if I'm going to spend the money to hire people to work for me, I'm going to trust them to do it, and so I could not see a situation where I would be the owner and I would not trust. Like I'd find a way. Like look, if I was paying a general manager, $5 million a year, and like that to me is my that's my fandom right there. That's the exercise of my fandom is okay. I'm gonna whatever I'm buying into that guy who's then buying into the quarterback. And I know that that's behind. I think a lot of people would say differently or whatever, but there is an element too of like not emasculating, but it's sort of like you do hurt that relationship a little bit by going over and doing his job for this one particular pick. You say like, I will do anything for love, but I won't do that. Like that's, to me, it's a little bit like I would be worried. But, and again, this is like plugging Sumer Sports. Like a lot of the stuff we're trying to do is what's called constrained optimization. Like, much like in fantasy football, for all of you that play DFS, you can go in and be like, I'm starting Travis Kelce because I know, and you optimize around it. You're capable of doing that. It's a much harder problem at the NFL level, but we could say, look, ownership wants Johnny Football. We're going to optimize around that. Like that's something that we want to help people do at Sumer, because I think one of Thomas, maybe the charges that I think is realistic against analytics people is that we're too dogmatic and we have, we don't understand the dynamics that go on and what you're forced to do as a team builder, right? We know, or at least I know, like I have on good sources that the second time Darrelle Revis went to the Jets, it was the owner's decision to do that. So if you're a general manager, you're just like, well, we got to work around this. Like this is life, right? Now you don't want to have that happen too much, but it does happen. And any analyst worth their salt and any, to your point, general manager worth his or her salt should say, I need to work around this, right? And because it's part of your job.
Yeah, look, we could talk forever about this. I know we were talking about Manziel, and I brought up the owner thing only because it's a really important topic. Back to Manziel, if I can quickly. Do you think? I mean, when you watched the whole thing, I mean, what was your final take on it? Basically, on Johnny, like, where is he going? I mean, when you see him accept the award at the at the Hall of Fame, you kind of felt for him. You had a little bit of that lump in your throat, like, that's got to be tough to sit up there and admit your foibles and your issues. Who knows? Was it real? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of empathy for him because I know it can't be easy to. I just know that couldn't have been easy for him, right? Like none of that could have been easy for him, and there's obviously like I'm making assumptions here, but like a lot of people just simply didn't have the addictions and the demons that he had, right? And so like I love football even when I played, but even now, like I just would not like just go to Vegas the night before of a football game, right? But like, and so most people with that opportunity would not do that, but none of us are in his brain. None of us know the triggers that will make him truly happy. And like I feel bad for a person who was fundamentally unhappy, as unhappy as him, where he couldn't enjoy something that I think a lot of people would have enjoyed.
That's a great point. I sit there and my head goes to, you mentioned him a little bit earlier. I really like Brady Quinn, right? As a person. I'm not talking, I mean, here's a guy that was everyone's All-American, right? Good looking guy, where he, just everything in his background. But here's a guy who handled it well, recovered through it all, handles it with such class and tact, and just everything about him as he handles it in the media now. But then I go back and I look at it, and I think the track record of some of these wayward souls, so to speak, right? Johnny, some of the other quarterbacks that just didn't have the personality that brought the team together the same way for other reasons. It could be Jeff George. We've talked about that.
I mean, Ryan Leaf is the quintessential example.
But it's funny because Ryan, I really like dealing with Ryan in the media now, right? And Ryan, I feel like he's real, like, I effed it up, man. So anyway, I think that's the biggest thing. That position is such a special position. I'm not saying you can't be edgy. I mean, look, you could call Brett Favre edgy, right? And he is what he is. So some people believe I want to have an edgy guy there because they're the difference maker. And I don't know. I think there's more of those guys that are really edgy that did not reach their potential, maybe because focus wavered. I don't know, but it's I know personally, if I'm signing someone to 50, 60, 70 on the way to $100 million a year one day, man, that person better have everything in place.
Well, and you talk about Matt as being kind of a gradual leader, as he doesn't strike me as a rah guy, and yet he led your team very well. You also, from what I could tell, like you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you had personalities on that team that complimented him, like Roddy White and so forth, that can help. And then there are some quarterbacks, everybody makes fun of Aikman because they don't think his stats were good, but like you watch those old Dallas games and Michael Irvin's messing around in the huddle, Emmitt Smith's goofing off, Troy Aikman walked in that huddle, took a knee, and everybody shut the hell up. Like that's another leader. And Troy wasn't exactly like a yell at a guy on the sideline type of person, but he was. And then you had Steve Young trying to fight, who is it, George Seifert on the sideline during the Super Bowl year. And there's tons of and what I think is interesting, and again, this is why I try to have empathy for Johnny Manziel, even though he squandered all those opportunities. It's face facts. He squandered those opportunities. And whatever becomes of that, he'll have to determine from here on out. But I will say that there is not one way to play quarterback. And I think that is truly the hard thing, because when people struggle at the position, I think people who are around a guy who aren't like you, like somebody who's got a ton of experience, who's been around it before. Like the people in Johnny Manziel's ear are probably telling him to try to be something he's not supposed to be. And it's probably the wrong thing. Like, be like Brett Favre. Like Brett Favre was a drunk. You can be a drunk and be a great quarterback too. And all this kind of stuff. Like, and again, I know Brett got his stuff together, but it's whereas playing quarterback is a lot more complicated than that. You have to be obviously great physically. You have to be great mentally. You have to present well. You have to lead, and you have to lead in your own particular way. All this stuff, and no one's in Johnny Manziel's ear being like, "Hey, you'll grow." No one's in his ear telling him that stuff, and that to me, I think, is the sad part.
It's sad, and again, look forward to watching to see how things play out and everything. I don't know where you are with time. We're at 39. Are we going to talk Texans or
let's talk Texans for 5 minutes? Because I actually want to bring, because again, we showed people sumersports.com. We have the Texans with the second fewest wins projected, or second lowest power rank. You have to go to sumersports.com and a lot of that's due to what are called priors, Thomas. Basically, they've struggled for 3 years, and so they add players, but for the most part, you got to kind of, you have a new coach, you have all this stuff, and you have to kind of do the math a little bit to come up with their projection, and yet when I look at that team, I think to myself, it's not that far away. You look defensively, you have a good edge rusher in Willie Anderson. You have, guys like Denzel Perriman playing linebacker. You have guys, like Shaq Griffin playing corner, and like Derek Stingley. You have a guy who's a third overall pick playing corner, a guy who's a third overall pick playing edge. That's a good start. On the offensive line, you got guys like Laramie Tunsil, Tyus Howard, who's come around. Wide receiver is a bit tricky, I think, because Robert Woods is your best wide receiver, and he's getting up there in age. And at running back, you have Dameon Pierce. And you have a quarterback who's, I think the second best quarterback prospect in the draft by many people's measure. There's a lot to work with there. How does it kind of, when you think about your time rebuilding the Falcons, right? That Falcons team before you showed up were 4-12. You show up, you get a quarterback at 3, much like this regime does, right? And Casario's I'm more talking about DeMeco being the start of a new regime than I am, because Nick is still there. So it's not quite a beginning of a new regime. But you go in, you get a quarterback high, much like they did. And it kind of turned out well for you guys. Do you see possibly that happening in Houston, or is it kind of like what kind of similarities and differences do you see there between the Texans and your old Falcons?
I had a conversation with Nick Caserio about this probably 2 years ago when he came in, right? Dealing with a quarterback situation. We dealt with a quarterback situation when Mike Smith and I came in, of course, with Michael Vick. He's dealing with it with Deshaun Watson. He's dealing with a lot of people, veterans that were leaving potentially. They were pushing him out, Nick and whoever his head coach was at the time. We did the same thing. I feel like there were a lot of, sort of parallels there. How we handled it might have been differently. Might have been different. Excuse me. I mean, Nick. The big thing is Nick's still looking for his head coach, right? He's had 2. This is his 3rd head coach. I feel very blessed that we knocked it out of the park with Smitty early on. I mean, again, coach of the year 3 times out of 5 years. Nick, and I love Nick, and I think Nick is a really good football man. He's now got someone here that I think he's really excited about working with. I don't know that, but I think he's excited about having a guy in here like DeMeco, who is a football guy, high energy guy, competitive guy. I think the players are going to fall into place. So my point is, I do empathize with him on a lot of levels, and yet now is the time this has to be a hit, right? They have to hit with this head coach and with this quarterback. We haven't even talked about him a whole bunch. This is a lot of pressure on an organization to get it right. And I've seen, Cal and his wife, the owner and his wife, talk pretty in a pretty outspoken way about what's going on with this team, especially, Mr. McNair's wife. And she's got a strong opinion, which I love hearing it. And I think they have high thoughts about what they're going to do there, but time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell. They have the 3rd easiest schedule in the NFL per sumersports.com, if you want to go ahead and look at that. 6.7 wins is what we predict them to have. They have a 6.5 win total on the betting market. So it's about where we're at with them. I would not be surprised to see this team win 8, 9 or 10 games, just because the schedule isn't as bad as it has been in the past. The AFC is tough, but the AFC South is kind of this oasis where there are some rebuilding teams. When you look at, Jacksonville drafted their quarterback just 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and then all 3 other teams drafted their quarterback of the future this year. So you have some chance of kind of getting up to it there. They have an 8% chance of earning the 1st overall pick, but that pick goes to Arizona. So there is a little bit of, Thomas, there's a little bit of this year they need to win, because they traded their picks next year, a lot of them, for the chance to draft Will Anderson. They took Stroud at 2, they took Anderson at 3. There isn't like there's next year. Like they got to win this year, because they put a lot of chips into the basket this year, which is tough. or eggs in the basket. I get my metaphors mixed up, but I'm really excited to see how they go. I think the league is better, obviously, when Houston is good, back when the Oilers were playing, and now with the Texans. I'd like to see them have success. I'd like to see DeMeco Ryans have success because, again, they've been the one franchise that has actually stuck their neck out and hired multiple underrepresented coaches in a row. The first two didn't work. I don't want that to be a reason that DeMeco Ryans doesn't work. So I'm rooting. I'm like looking at this team and I'm thinking like I would love for this team to be competitive this year because I think a lot of teams. I think the league could benefit from it.
Yeah, I think it could. I'm excited for DeMeco to be in that spot for him. I'm excited for Nick Caserio to have, someone that, personalities feel like they probably mesh, and that said, I'm sure Nick is going to step back a little bit like he is because, he came up through the Belichick, tree, of course, the Patriot paradigm. And they believe any people have come through New England believe that the head coach should have their place in the organization firmly, set. And again, without getting into a ton of that right now, I hope for the best for them, and we'll see how it plays out. But leave me, I think there are many D coordinators in this league right now who are licking their, chops, thinking about some of the young quarterbacks. That's not different there, right? They come in and they just want to rip, roar, turn those young guys upside down. Because before you know it, some are going to work out. What is, by the way, the stat? If you have 5 or 6 quarterbacks coming out a year, is it 2 of those hit? Do you know the stat?
It's usually around that percentage. However, it's an interesting one because how do you denote whether or not somebody hit? Yeah. Because and this gets down to our joke about Baker Mayfield. The Browns were 1-31 the 2 years before Baker. They were 30-30 in games Baker played. I consider that a success, even though I agree with you that Baker's not a great quarterback. So, it's weird. I think the Texans could go 10-7, even with CJ Stroud not lighting the world on fire, just because of the way things work. But it's about 2 out of 5. Yeah, it's about 2 out of 5 that end up being kind of, second contract guys at the QB position, which is interesting. Before we wrap it up, firstly, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. A couple of things. Somebody really did appreciate my Houston Oilers love here. Oilers number 1, Jose Bocanranga. Good one there. Ryan, though, likes to shout this out. From 2008 to 2017 was the best 10-year run by far in Falcons history under Thomas Dimitroff. Now,
Ryan, thank you.
All of the stats that I've done, though, I include 2020 just to make sure, just to keep you honest. Yep. And I will say, if you look at Pro Football Reference's approximate value, no one generated from 2008, 2020 more approximate value per draft pick than the co-host of the Sumer Sports Show with Eric Eager and Thomas Dimitroff. So, put some respect on that name. But I do go back in the Falcons history, and you do have the Super Bowl appearance in '98 under Chris Chandler. You had the '91 year, which was a lot of fun, but not as good as any of your teams. And then you go back all the way to the June Jones, Jerry Glanville kind of defense teams. Those were fun, but not very good. I do agree that, I think objectively 2008 to 2017 was the best 10-year run. And that included one where you had to hire a new coach and you still, had to rebuild it a second time. So that, a good shout out there by Ryan. I'm assuming you don't have any notes for that other than thank you, but.
Yeah. Well, look, I do want to say thank you on that, and I'd also like to say, I like what the Falcons are doing right now with putting their team together. They have some really good football players, right? Really good football players.
It's going to be hard to have a bad offense when your best wide receiver, your best tight end, and your best running back are all top 10 picks, and your offensive line has 3 All-Pros. It's going to be hard. Now,
the only thing I'll say, Eric, I was just going to say, though, I have been around organizations when we felt stacked and we're like, we're on our way to the Super Bowl. And it's not always easy keeping everyone happy. I know people don't want to, I'm not throwing water on the fire. I'm just saying you got to be mindful, right? Look, the good thing is you don't have a lot of, old time veterans in that group. You have some young guys still that are, now they're looking for their contracts. Look, get Pitts the ball,
Well, if you're going to make the draft pick worth it, you got to throw him the football. Otherwise, it was probably not the best use of capital. I will say this. Desmond Ridder, we were looking at the office. We were watching the joint practices. Obviously, love to see Desmond Ridder have success. You'd love to see kind of a later round quarterback. He looks kind of small to me, though. I do worry about them trying to run the ball as much as they did with Mariota last year with Ritter, even though he is athletic. He is small. Like I feel like we got to send him some of those EAS shakes that Brady Quinn, your guy, was touting on Men's Health magazines near his draft time, just for him to bulk up a little bit. If he was Brady Quinn size physically, I'd have no questions about him.
Arthur Smith's going to get the most out of those guys. And I keep saying this. I love his approach to the run game. And now with a stud running back, I don't think there's been a better running back in quite a while. I just really like what they're doing. And we'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah, you have to go back to probably Barkley since the last time a running back has come into the league with that much ability. So awesome. So this has been episode 91 of the Sumer Sports Show there, Eager and Thomas Dimitroff. We'll do something fun for the 100th episode. I promise you that. We thank you all for showing up today. Obviously, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Tell somebody not only about this great podcast, but about our website, sumersports.com. So for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 91 of the Sumer Sports Show.